Welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast. We're here to show you how practical psychology can be useful and make your workplace better. I'm Dr. Ernest Wayde. Okay, our guest today is an empathetic consultant and coach who holds leaders accountable and gets results. And I just love that combination of empathy, but also the focus on the results. And I think it's really such a great approach in the workplace. Her name is Dr. Kathy Bittner. Now, Kathy specializes in leveraging senior executives' leadership potential and performance. Her specific area of expertise is talent development, including executive assessment and executive coaching and development. Kathy also uses scenario role play and simulations in her work to help provide leaders feedback, which I think is such a fantastic approach. So we'll definitely talk about that. But first, Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and to see you again.
Yeah, Kathy, great to see you again. I'm really glad that you were able to come on the show. I want to talk about scenario role play, but first, I always want to ask, tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into this kind of work?
Sure. Well, it goes back a ways to college, and I thought at first I wanted to go into counseling psychology, but I took a class in industrial organizational psychology my sophomore year, and I really fell in love with it, Ernest. I kind of just dove in with both feet. I thought, how nice to marry business with, psychology. I had never really known about that side of psychology. As you know, there's a lot of different sects, SECTS, of psychology. And that was never one that was presented to me before. I mean, I was only a sophomore anyway, but so I took it and I started taking some management classes, and then I went to Bucknell University for my undergrad, and then I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University for my master's in IO. And then I went to Penn State for my doctorate in industrial organizational psychology. So I kind of had a straight path after I fell in love with that class and decided that that's really what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I love that story. I think this is one of the great things that I love about the field of psychology is there's so much that you can do with it. And so I really appreciate what you're doing with it. And I want to ask you about one of the things that I know that you do, which is selection and talent development. Help us understand what that is and how psychology actually plays a role.
Sure.
In that.
It's funny because I just coached a leader today and I said, I do selection interviews. And he said, what's selection interviews? And so I had to explain it to him. But really, I do a lot of work for different organizations. I have my own business, Bittner and Associates LLC, and consulting firm, and I partner with other larger consulting firms. Sometimes I do subcontracting work, and then I have my own clients. But a lot of times I will do selection interviewing. So if companies are trying to hire people, usually at higher levels, maybe like director level and above, they'll call someone like me in, and I will do a maybe 2-hour interview with them. I might do a simulation or two with them. I may do some personality testing, some leadership effectiveness analysis testing, motivation. So I might do a series of tests, if you will, or personality or inventories, if you will, and then also do some simulation work. So that would be for someone who is looking to get hired for a particular position. So maybe an internal hire or external hire. And then I'm also might do that for someone seeking promotion. A lot of my work is really around development. So developing people to be higher level leaders, to look at some high potential folks. Sometimes I have cohorts of people going through the same kinds of whether it be interviews or testing or the simulations, as you said, and then I write reports and then give them feedback afterward.
So help us understand, because a lot of times people think, oh, when we're hiring somebody, we just need to make sure they can do the work. How does all this information, this behavioral, emotional, cognitive information that you're collecting, how does that help you determine if someone is going to be right for the job or not?
That's interesting you'd ask that, Ernest, just because I struggled with that when I first when I moved from assessment center work, which was really very behavioral, and all of the, as you said, the simulations where we put people through the paces and role plays and group scenarios, in the inboxes where they have to, or in baskets where they have to go through items and respond back, and then we take all that data and look at it and then kind of give them some feedback about what they actually did, what they actually said. So moving from that to individual assessment was a real leap for me, and was sort of difficult because I thought, well, I felt like I needed to put in data for everything I said, like justification for everything I said. And I worked with a counseling psychologist, Dr. Gil Hoffer, who I partnered with for probably about 6 years. And he really helped me to understand that organizations were paying me for my judgment and my own insight, but it has to be obviously based on data. So I think it's a matter of really pushing, pulling, and prodding the data, Ernest. And I would also say it's looking at the person holistically. Like, so you can look at the individual parts of what you collect, but if in the end you feel like it doesn't really describe the person as you've learned to get to know them, then you may be off in something that you're writing or what you're thinking about. And I've learned to really use that insight. I don't know, you could call it judgment, you could call it maybe, IOs would hate this, but gut feel. But I mean, you really, I've learned, like, my own intuition. I guess it's intuition. I've learned to use that along with the data to marry that, to come up with what I believe is a good recommendation for people, whether I say yay or not so much, or maybe somewhere in the middle if they help them out and do something developmentally for those people.
I love what you're saying there in terms of that gut feel, that intuition. I think that the important thing for people to remember is that you have that training and that experience that informs your intuition, that informs your gut feels. And it's not just you kind of how you feel, right? It's basically based upon all of your experience that you're able to then determine based upon the data and your interpretation of the data that really helps you to provide that recommendation. I want to talk a little bit about the inbox and the scenario play, because I think that's such a fascinating approach of doing this. Help us understand what is the inboxing. How do you walk someone through that, and what kind of things do you see in that setting that helps you get an informed understanding of who this person is and how they might behave in such scenarios?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've worked in assessment centers, and we call them development centers a lot of times now if it's not for selection or promotion. But I've worked in assessment centers since my days back at AT&T with Joel Moses and Miriam Graddick Weir and a lot of people. I worked at AT&T with about 30 IO psychologists. So it was great. It was so nice to be there when I was in my graduate school days. But that being said, so I've really done this for a long time, let's just say 42 years. So I've worked in simulations, and I love the work. Like you said, Ernest, it's so fascinating because what you do is you take people out of their real job and you put them into a different kind of scenario. So business scenario. So for example, I've done a lot of work in pharma, and let's say, so I've done a lot of work with sales reps who want to be district managers. So they are individual sales reps who carry the bag, so to speak, with their medications, and they go to physicians and talk with them. Sometimes, the best salesperson doesn't mean they're going to be the best manager. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of organizations make. They say, oh, this person has the best record, let's put them in. They got to be great. And, not necessarily. As Marshall Goldsmith says, what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And so I feel like with the inbox, what we do is first of all, we put people in a new scenario, like a new company. It might be a pharmaceutical sort of company, but it might be something else. It might be a little bit tangential. It might be a manufacturing organization, or it might be a oil and gas organization, or it could be something where we want to take them out of sort of their subject content or their subject matter expertise, if you will. So
why is that important to take them out of their comfort zone?
Because we want to see how they react kind of in the moment, and we want them to think about the decisions that they're making. So in the inbox, for example, we have them actually do emails. They get sort of these fake emails from the fake company, if you will. And we tell them to make it as real as possible for themselves. So we usually take them offline for 3 days. It used to be back in the day. Now everything's pretty much done on Zoom or Teams, but virtually. So you have them work maybe for several hours on the inbox. So they go through and they have to answer emails that come in. They play a part. They might be a VP in a pharmaceutical, and then they have to make decisions and make judgments and decide who they want to get back to or not. So it's about organizing, prioritizing, making good decisions, using good judgment. So then what I do is I take that and I look at it item by item, but then sort of holistically, where are their strengths? Where are their areas to focus on? We also do role plays. So like maybe a poor performing direct report role play where they were doing really well, but maybe something's impeding their performance and they have to give some pretty hard feedback or critical feedback. That's hard for a lot of people, as you know. And then we maybe do group exercises. So we watch their behavior in groups and how do they emerge as a leader and what behaviors come to the surface. So we're really looking very behaviorally and then giving them feedback on those behaviors. Usually it's couched within competencies that the organization deems very necessary for leadership in their organizations. And of course, there needs to be validation studies and things before that goes into play.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said there in terms of, and I see this a lot, and I'm sure you do too, where somebody is technically excellent at their work, a good salesman or a good engineer or whatever. And the natural tendency is, well, they're good at this, then they should be the manager, the leader. And there's two very different skills sometimes. And it's not always a good match. So I think this approach of putting them in the specific scenarios, that inbox activity, I think is such a great way of seeing how somebody might react and then being able to give them feedback. I do a lot of role plays myself when I work with leaders. I think one of the things that they've come to appreciate is it's a great opportunity for them to practice as well. When they're going to give feedback or something something challenging, it's an opportunity to practice. How might this go? And gives them a sense of how they might respond and how they might react. So I think that's such a great tool to be able to do that. It's very practical and very useful. Kathy, I want to ask you a little bit about your approach, because you describe yourself as empathetic, but also holding people accountable for results. And I think that combination is so critical. Help me understand how you're able to do both, because sometimes we associate empathy with being a little bit soft, but accountability is also very important in a business setting.
Sure. Well, I think it is a bit of a difficult balance at times, but I do think that I try to be, really a warm person and empathy. I think I am strong in empathy. I've taken some tests and know I'm 99% out of 100 on empathy. So, which is a problem because sometimes I cry at commercials, Sarah McLachlan starts singing with the dogs and it's all over. But, so I think it can be, it can be tough sometimes as a coach. I mean, I do well up. I remember I gave some feedback not too long ago where, we both cried in the feedback session. I mean, it was just so powerful, as you mentioned. We had talked offline, but about being, genuine and sincere and authentic. And it just, for me, it was giving this person permission to get over like kind of his imposter syndrome. We had done a whole bunch of simulations with him, and he had done really well. And it wasn't just me saying it, but some of my colleagues. And I told him to just, he needed to shed that baggage. And, so we both just, really got emotional over it. And he, we're still in touch to this day. Actually, I don't coach him per se anymore, but we're friends and we get together and we talk, and it's just really nice. So I think, but yet I also think, it's good to, like, for him, it was good to hold him accountable to the things that he needed to do as a leader as well. So it's not like I shied away from giving him critical feedback, but it was sort of like this piece where he was almost holding himself back this piece of imposter syndrome where, he had worked himself up from really literally the custodial staff in the organization to a CEO of one of the companies in the organization, and didn't feel like he had gotten to the right schools, didn't feel like he had the right credentials. And we talked about it and said, it really doesn't matter for you, because he's so creative, so incredible with a lot of the things that he did. Well, one gave him some feedback on the things that he didn't do as well. And we, talked about where he would go next with a development plan. I usually like to push, kind of push toward that direction of people having a development plan, because the research I've read says, maybe this too, Ernest, is that having a coach and having a smart development plan that goes back to the, MBO days of the 1960s, the SMART acronym, and then reflecting on that development plan every week and looking at what you feel most proud of, what you think you could do differently, more effectively next time. Maybe you tried something on the development plan and it was a little awkward, or you made a misstep, because these are things that not everybody is really good at. It's not part of your strength set. It's part of the areas that you want to focus on and develop in.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about there, Kathy. It's so important when we're doing coaching to make sure that there's a specific goal, right? That it has to be purposeful coaching and not just talking for the sake of talking. Especially in the business world, it's really important that you're helping the leader become better at something specific or do something specific. So I love that you use the action plan there. I want to ask you a little bit about the imposter syndrome and how you're able to help leaders overcome that, because I've worked with so many leaders and I've come to realize that a lot of leaders actually suffer from that imposter syndrome. So how are you able to help them recognize that, overcome that, and then also recognize that there's still some things that they need to work on? So that balance is really important. How are you able to achieve that?
Well, that's a great question. I think I really like having data when I coach, and I think if you get some good 360 feedback data, it is really helpful, because you can focus in on a lot. What did people actually say in the written comments? I love the quantitative data, and I look at, kind of like top 5 or top 10 behaviors and the bottom. And there's always a top and a bottom. So even if people do really well, like on a 5-point scale, and they have everything 4.5 and over, what's the 4.5 and what could they work on, and that sort of thing. But so I think that's really nice. And I also think that the simulation work is very helpful, or even talking to their manager, let's say, or you can do a phone or virtual 360. I really like those too, of just talking to a lot of people who know that person well. And then you can really build them up with, here's all, like, people said really incredible things about you. And this is, you really have a lot of strengths in these areas. And then there's a little bit of a however, there's some things that we could work on. So, and I always say, I don't know about if you do this, Ernest, but I always say, what's maybe 2 or 3 areas that you are willing to and motivated to work on? It's not something I'm going to impose on you. It's my job to point it out. And that's my job to tell you the consequences, perhaps, if you don't work on these things. Like, a lot of times, people should be working on thinking and acting more strategically and more higher level in terms of longer term, for the business. And some people have a lot of trouble with that. And I talk about, well, if you don't pick that, and that's something that really came up for you, I think that could really hurt you as a leader. I mean, one of the research studies that I've looked at is by a management research group, and they have an instrument called the LEA, which is a leadership effectiveness analysis. It's 22 sets of leadership behaviors, and strategic leadership is one of those. And they have sliced and diced the data in so many different ways. They have millions of people who've taken this test, and they have norm groups from all over the world. And what it shows is that people who don't do well in strategic leadership tend to not do well in higher levels of executive leadership or management. They tend to derail. And by when I say strategic leadership, I'm thinking about two things. One is, are they able to think conceptually and abstractly and like broadly enough about the business? And then secondly, are they able to toggle back and forth between what does the business need 5, 10 years down the road and what are we doing now? And are we actually cascading goals from that longer term to what we're working on a daily basis? Or are we working on something else that doesn't really matter that much to the business?
Yeah, tying that tactical to the strategic, I think is really important. I really appreciate what you're saying there, Kathy, in terms of using the 360 data to help, challenge some of those thoughts. I myself, when I do a lot of working with leaders who have that imposter syndrome, we'll do a little bit of reality testing with them just to see, is what you're thinking or your fears actually valid? Because look at you, you're in this top level leadership position. Look at how you got there. It's all of these accomplishments that have gotten you there. And so do a little bit of reality testing and have them keep that in mind to do some of that, challenge some of those negative thoughts and with data. I want to ask you about your expertise in data, Kathy, because I think, especially as an IO psychologist, one of the things that people don't understand is just how well versed we are to understand and interpret data. And so talk to us a little bit about the training that you have in data and how you're able to leverage that in the work.
Sure. Yeah, I took statistics in high school, then in college, then in obviously a lot in grad school. It sort of clicked for me a little bit more in grad school. I thought it was difficult in both high school and college because I think statistics is so different than other types of math, right? And sort of like a different way of looking at analyzing information and numbers and things. But you go through grad school, and I'm not quite so old to have used cards, that physical cards in computers, but I wasn't too far off of that. But I did I did SPSS, SAS, and so I think just doing validation studies. I did that at AT&T. I was, had practicum at Penn State. We did lots of surveys, satisfaction surveys for teachers. We had a teachers union for this, for the state that I was working in. So we had I had a lot of practical application for use of data, and have always liked doing research. I love, reading about research, trying to keep current on things. And so I've used that. I get certified in a lot of different instruments. As a matter of fact, this past month I got certified in the Mesquite, which is the emotional intelligence test, which looks at emotional intelligence as an ability and how it can be used for decision making, as opposed to some of the other instruments that are EQ oriented. Trying to say anything negative about those, and those have their place as well, but that's more of a self understanding of your own emotions, where this is an actual test of how well can you perceive and use and facilitate and understand and manage emotions. So it's really interesting. And so I go to a lot of conferences too, Ernest. That's where I met you. At Carol Washalishan's conference on coaching, but I do a lot, and I go to PSYOP and Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology every year. I go to Leading Edge Consortium. I'm on the board of the Leadership Forum community. So I go to a lot of, and Society for Consulting Psychologists, CP. So I feel like you're never too old to learn, and I try to have learning agility mindset and try to continue to learn what's the latest research, looking at the latest data, looking at what are the best instruments to use. I have a lot of different ones I like to use, but I can mix and match, I think, and that helps you to get some really good data for whatever the purpose is of what you're doing with selection or development or coaching.
Yeah, I think that's such a great representation of the level of training that you get related to data and analytics and interpretation, and then the continued work that you do, especially as someone who's in that work all the time, using data in terms of all the things that you do to stay abreast of all the latest and the greatest when it comes to data. And I think such a great ability and great skill that psychologists have is that understanding and interpretation of data. So I really appreciate that. Kathy, how does someone get a hold of you if they want to continue the conversation or get a hold of your services? What's a good way to?
Well, you can email me at kbittner@bittnerandassociates.com is probably a good way to just get in touch with me. So just email me and I'd be happy to email you back and we could talk about work or non-work. I am also married almost 38 years. I've got 2 daughters, grown now, and we have 3 grandchildren. So two little girls and a little boy who's 7 months old. So that keeps me busy too. So I think it's good to have a well-rounded perspective. I'm not all work. Sometimes it feels like you're all work, but I like to call it sort of work-life fit rather than work-life balance because they don't.
Yeah, I like that, work-life fit. Kathy, before I let you go, I always want to take advantage of the experts we have in the show and ask, what's a tip or advice that you have for leaders, organization, employees, especially in this time that we're all in right now?
Sure. Well, it's tough. It's tough in the world right now. We've got a lot going on, but I'd say, for people to just have that learning mindset and to really reflect on what they're doing and kind of how they're doing it, why they're doing it. And, I really hope that executives, and I work with executives to try to push them to do this, but to reflect every week on how they're doing on their development plan. Again, what do they feel most proud of? What do they feel they, maybe didn't do as well on the development plan? What are they going to do next week? And I'd also say that, a good question to ask the folks who work with you as an executive, as a leader, is just, what's one thing I could do differently or more effectively as a leader? It's a very powerful question, and it really does kind of help to zero in or dovetail into what's most salient on people's minds, really, and what comes to mind, and then they can, give you a piece of advice. But you have to humble yourself and be very vulnerable and open to that feedback. You have to say, no, I really want to know. Tell me the good, the bad, the ugly, to quote a Clint Eastwood movie, So.
Yeah, we used to say in my previous work, feedback is a gift, and I love that because it's such an important thing.
Right.
If you don't ask for feedback, you won't get the sense of what people are thinking about you or how your intentions are coming across and impacting other people. So I love that. Now, Kathy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This has been fantastic.
You're welcome, Ernest. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you.
Awesome. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leave us a review. We love feedback. Feedback is a gift, and we love gifts. So please consider leaving us some feedback. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. We hope you will join us again next time.